I call this house to order. Oh, sorry. Well, that's very impolite. Now that Sydney have had the decency to join the rest of us, I call this house to order, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome you all to the semi-final of Botswana Worlds. Contesting this round today, in the opening government, the team from the Sydney Union A. In closing government, the Sydney Union B. In opening opposition, the Cambridge Union A. Seemingly quite popular, and in closing opposition, the Oxford Union A. The motion before the House today is this House opposes organised religion. It's my very great pleasure to call upon the Prime Minister, Mr. Tim Mooney, to rise and defend the motion that stands in his name.
Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, if there is a God, I doubt that he is impressed by the excesses and the needless proliferation of rules that make lives worse of churches like Catholicism, of churches like the Anglican Church. I doubt that he is impressed by people that say that you can only worship him in a particular way and that his holy books must be interpreted in a particular fashion. And I doubt that he is impressed by churches that take 10% of the wealth of very poor people and use it to buy some of the world's most important art. And that is why this team is proud to oppose organised religion that has been making lives worse, that has been making nations worse, that has been making wars worse for thousands and thousands of years. Let's be very clear on this. For those of you hoping for an 8-point model, there isn't one. This is not about a policy, it is about a value judgment. So what we will clearly set out is what we oppose and what we support. What do we oppose? We oppose churches, we oppose organisation, we oppose leadership, and we oppose exclusion. So, if for instance people have a particular holy text that they wish to study, we are happy for them to do so. If they wish to come together and study and discuss that holy text in a certain place together or pray together, we are happy for them to do so. We are not happy for one person to be a leader of that group. We are not happy for people to be able to exclude on the basis of particular interpretations of that text. And we are not happy for any form of kind of organisation or structure behind that. We are happy for people to pray to their gods. We are happy for people to determine themselves what the meaning of those holy texts is. And much as I perhaps would like it to be, we don't think this is a debate about the existence or not of God. It assumes that there is some sort of existence of God and that people should be able to determine that themselves. Why do we oppose organised religion? Firstly, presuming the existence of a God, it disrupts that connection with God. Secondly, it foments tension and conflict in the world. And thirdly, it makes the lives of individuals worse. Firstly, it disrupts the connection with God. If religions do reflect the existence of a God, we think that this means that people are less able to personally determine their connection with that God and to personally realise that connection with that God. And we think that religion has to be characterised by spirituality rather than structure, because it is about finding that personal connection with God and finding the ability to connect with Him personally. Why do religions stop that? Firstly, because they make decisions that exclude certain interpretations that are just as valid as any other. Like the Conference of Nicaea, which determined that if you wanted to be a Christian, then you had to accept the divinity of Jesus, even though that question is entirely not there in the books of the Bible as they were originally written. Like the biblical apocrypha that were excluded from the Bible, that showed things like Jesus being a troublesome child who used skills like sorcery to kill other people, like the churches that have a particular interest in a type of interpretation of God. Those interpretations of God, A, could be correct. They might be the correct way to worship, and people deserve the ability to know them and understand them and not be excluded from their communities if they disagree with their church. But B, that people ought to be able to find their own way. Duh.
Okay, so what you've said is that we need to be able to criticise pre-existing religious modalities of thought. Doesn't our model solve for that with the Protestant Reformation, whereby we criticise pre-existing religions and we often make new ones?
Two reasons why that's not the case, though. Two reasons why that's not the case. One, the Protestant Reformation did nothing about all of the facts of the way that Christianity had been delimited by people before that, except for about 50 years' worth of indulgences being given. Two, all of those Protestant churches have themselves created exactly the kind of power structures, exactly the kind of limiting structures the Catholic Church already had. Second part of this argument. The presence of this authoritarian structure disrupts the moments of personal realisation that we think are at the core of spirituality. So again, we look to institutions like the Catholic Church and say that rather than being able to have a personal connection with God, you need to have your priest as an interlocutor for that connection and depend on that priest there. And that exists for other churches as well, when fundamentally your realisation of religion, your realisation of what it means to you, is disrupted by people who claim the authority to say that that realisation is wrong, that that realisation doesn't reflect reality, even though you personally might believe that you have found your connection with God. But thirdly, we think that there's a proliferation of rules which remove the focus on connection with God from people who want to worship God in a particular way. So the political fight over condoms for Catholics makes every Catholic a warrior in a war over politics that has nothing whatsoever to do with that Catholic's ability to worship God and to enter the kingdom of heaven. They shouldn't be involved in that, and they shouldn't be forced by their priests, as they often are, to be a part of that. And that applies to Presbyterians and things like gambling. It applies to people like members of Ian Paisley's church and their willingness to support horrible, horrible political parties that he was involved in. Secondly, fomenting tension and conflict. It is true that there are wars that haven't been based on religion. It is more true that there are wars that have been based exclusively on the existence of organised religion, that have been whipped up by organised religion, that have been created by organised religion. Like hundreds of years of the murder of Muslims in the Holy Land by Christians, whipped up by the Catholic Church. Like generations of wars in countries like Bosnia. Firstly, religion, and organised religion in particular, is a metric to dehumanise others by their membership of an exclusive community and their non-membership of your exclusive community. Serbs, Croats, Bosniaks, same ethnicity, same language, one difference, religion. And yet when you ask the people that murdered Croats in the Bosnian War why they did it, they would tell you it's because being a member of a particular church makes them less human than others. And when you look, for instance, at the Sudan, the language that is used by those people who are fomenting genocide in black areas of southern Sudan is to call black Africans the Arab word for slaves based on their identification with the religions of Christianity and animism, which they see as superstition. When you look at Chad, you see exactly the same thing applying. You see exactly the same thing applying the other way around to Arab people. Secondly, ideological communities create hard barriers based on people never communicating with one another, despite the fact that they have strong identifications. You look to West Belfast and you look to East Belfast, and you find poor communities that are roughly the same as one another, except for the fact that they go to different churches and they identify with different organised religions. They are very different to the wealthy Protestants of East Belfast, and yet the politics of those incredibly poor people is destroyed by the divisions between them, created by the fact that they never ever come into contact with one another when all of their institutions, when their schools, are defined by their religion. Finally, this makes the lives of individuals worse. It firstly limits freedom and agency, and does so systematically in ways that are misogynist and that stop people from being with the people that they love. Oftentimes, those rules means that people don't get to be with the person they love because of their gender. Oftentimes, you get things like pressure from Hindu and Sikh groups not to marry Muslims, and for families to exclude people from their families because religious leaders from those communities don't want members of those families being there. So they don't create religious communities, they break down pre-existing family communities by excluding people that want to take one simple step outside of the dogma of this religion. Ladies and gentlemen, God can make people's lives better. But interlocutors to God, leaders who determine your relationship with God, and people who are there to tell you every step of the way that your personal beliefs about God can only make your lives and the world a worse place. This important motion must absolutely stand.
I call upon the Leader of the Opposition, Maria English, to introduce the case for the opening opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately for Tim, this debate is not a debate about whether we think Catholicism is good. This is a debate about whether we think organised religion is good. Here's the difference. Organised religion doesn't have to be the things that Catholicism is. So, for example, organised religion doesn't have to be hierarchical. See, for example, the Quakers. Organised religion doesn't have to be, for example, exclusive. See the people from like Seventh-day Adventists and Mormon churches who knock on your door every day dressed in suits trying to convince you to convert to their religion. We don't think that the defining factor of organised religion is this kind of exclusivity and this like need to cause war. We think the defining factor of organised religion is that is the institutional framework within which people, for many people, it's the only way they can have the kind of religious experience, just the kind of experience that Mr. Mooney and his team want people to have. I'm going to talk about that first, why there's no such thing as private religion. You have to allow institutions if you accept your right to private sexuality. Secondly, I want to talk about the social impacts. I'm going to deal with all the harms, talk about my proposition, and I'm also going to look at some of the benefits that were ignored. So first of all, why do we think there's no right to private religion? First of all, we just need to establish here very clearly that we think the default to something greater, so to some kind of higher power, is absolutely intrinsic to the human spirit and is an intrinsic need because it solves a very big existential problem for human beings. So we think the fact that religion is a near universal phenomenon suggests that innateness, right? So given that's the case, why do we need organised religion in order to facilitate this? Thank you. First of all, just in terms of the ways in which people express their relationship with God or worship God or whatever, requires them to have some kind of institutional framework. So the rites that religion is based on, the ceremonies that religion is based on, the traditions that religion is based on, are all things that are not only something that you need some kind of institution, like you can't worship unless you have a church to worship in for many of these people, but furthermore, it goes across time, right? You rely on what's happened previously, you rely on those previous traditions in order to build on them and increase your experience of faith. He talked about holy books. He said, well, you can still read a holy book if you want. Like, one of the key problems and one of the reasons we see these institutions rise up is most people don't actually know how to interpret ancient texts of scripture, right? They need some kind of institution where you have a body of people who can actually give you some advice about how to read these scripts. Often people read the Bible and they have tricky questions about what it says. They go to their priest, they go to, you know, the experts on theology who are part of that institution, embedded in that institution to create some kind of holistic and cohesive interpretation of what that scripture means. That doesn't mean there's one right interpretation. Like, he talked about the Reformation. One of the things about the Reformation was it got rid of the Apocrypha for Protestants, right? His problem was the Apocrypha. So we think you can have different interpretations, but having a cohesive interpretation that is being institutionalized is absolutely important, and particularly it's important because it's accessible. It's accessible to all people. It's not accessible if you're just having random people going off one by themselves, reading books and trying to figure it out for themselves. Secondly, we'd like to talk about the communal aspect of religious practice, because they say it's about you and God. That's true, but it's also about you and other people. And in particular, it's about you and other believers, because when you believe something and other people also believe it, you practice together. That's a way of expressing your shared faith. No, thank you. Many religions say that the ties between people who are believers as well are more close than the ties between people in their own family, right? So that is why the communal aspect, the ability to come together in an institution like a church, is absolutely fundamental for fulfilling that collective aspect of faith. You don't get that if you don't have institutions, because like churches, all the church is a place where people can come together easily every Sunday or every Monday or whenever they do it and do things together that they all know in a shared language that they all understand. They get rid of that communal aspect. Furthermore, no thank you, we say that communities of religion help reinforce and drive faith. Because having faith in a world with a lot of skepticism and from a point of view of a religious person a lot of temptation, it is extremely important you can reinforce your own faith and reinforce your own belief. You cannot do that if you cannot be part of an institution that helps you reinforce that. We think, particularly as the world moves more towards secularism, if they agree it's a good thing or a necessary thing for people to search for a higher power, it's extremely important that people can have that kind of faith reinforcement. You only get that if you can organise, come together with other people and have some kind of institution that reinforces and reaffirms that faith. Yeah.
How likely do you think it is that the billion-member Catholic Church is going to give up the doctrine of papal infallibility tomorrow to become more like the Quakers in the 17th century, if that matters?
Under Vatican II, that's exactly what the Catholic Church did. So, moving on. This is a connection with God. The first thing to say is, we still think there's ample room for personal determination, right? You can personally determine to join a religion which you believe is best to facilitate your connection with God. If you think that's through a priest, and we already tell you plenty of religions don't have priests, like the Protestant Church specifically says, you don't need a priest in order to pray, you don't need a priest in order to get forgiveness, that's why they don't have things like confession. We think if you determine personally that that's the best way of facilitating your connection with God, that's extremely helpful for many people, and you should be able to do that. Secondly, again on priests. No, thank you. Just the thing to point out is they can pretty much point to any single element of one church they disagree with. The reality is people do disagree with certain institutions, and when that happens, they go and create their own. They reform, and we see so many split-offs. We see such a proliferation of religious institutions. They cannot simply say that one kind is the kind, and they have a problem with that. Moving on now to the social point. They talked about rules. They said, well, there's issues with Catholics' policies on condoms. We agree, churches do set rules. I'm going to tell you in a moment why that's a good thing. But we'd like to point out, you can have a differential level of buy-in into those rules. There are plenty of Catholics who oppose the Pope's policy on condoms. That doesn't mean they still don't benefit from the vast majority of what the Catholic Church provides as an organised institution. Fundamentally, almost no organised religion is coercive and doesn't stop you leaving. And no, thank you, almost no organised religion stops you from picking which bits you want. And if you think religion is too coercive, you can simply move to an institution like New Age or like Elam or something, which actually provides you the ability to practice more freely without those things. Religion causes war. We say religion and war are both fundamental factors in the human experience. That is why we see those things together. We think there are just as many wars which weren't caused by the religion. Often it's the religious organisations who are the ones calling for peace, because often these religions are fundamentally pacifist, right? So we think that's a good thing. They're conflating the Northern Irish example. We think that's actually about nationalism, not about religion. If their problem is religion creates differences between people, no, we think if anything, religion is maybe just a way of expressing those differences that already exist. You don't take away those differences, and you simply don't take away the right to war. So ladies and gentlemen, we say, first of all, religion actually inculcates, as I said before, a generalisable altruism. Secular altruism is about reciprocity. I'll give you something if you give something to me. Religion is different to that, because it creates a kind of altruism that's generalisable to all people, regardless of that. Secondly, it doesn't require enforcement. When the state says you should be a good person, it has to enforce that in order for it to be effective. If you believe in a religion, regardless of whether someone's watching you or not, you are going to enforce the moral principles that you believe. That's why we think rules are good. That's why we think people always join these kinds of religions, even if they think those rules are wrong, because they like to have a strong moral framework in which to operate. Ladies and gentlemen, if you accept the need for spirituality and private practice of religion, you must accept it.
I now call upon the Deputy Prime Minister, Bronwyn Cowell.
Ladies and gentlemen, this side of the house said religion can be so much more than what Tim and I painted it as. The religions reform and religions proliferate. Unfortunately for that side of the house, the overwhelming majority of religions that proliferated from older ones maintain the same bad features as those that they lack. They are hierarchical, they are exclusive, they are dogmatic, and they tell people what to believe, they exclude those who don't believe it, and they make people's lives miserable. I'll turn first to my rebuttal. Can religion, as an institution, be more than like the worst aspects of the Catholic Church? Absolutely, and I've already said that in my introduction. The defining features of institutionalised religion, as we talked about them, were an aspect of hierarchy, were being exclusive. Their response was, first of all, the Quakers, which is just garbage, because the Quakers were, in function, hierarchical. The men were at the top, and oftentimes it was the oldest man telling everybody how to behave. That's why you don't have any history or language or writing from Quaker women, because they weren't allowed to. Secondly, Mormons was their example as to how religions aren't exclusive. They live in walled compounds. And yes, they try and convert you, but up until you are converted to them, you are a heathen, and you, your family, and your children are going to hell. And that is true of most institutionalised religions. They will talk to you, they might interact with you, they might be friends with you, but they will see you as heathen and going to hell until you choose to ascribe to their interpretation of a 1,000-year-old text. Point of information coming from Doug was, guys, we've got the Protestants, it's all good, right? Okay, so we have the Catholics, and we have the Protestants, we have the Baptists, now we have the Happy Clappies, now we have liberal Episcopalians. They're still all hierarchical, and they're still all exclusive, and they're still all dogmatic. Some of them might be a little bit more palatable to like the left-wing PCs at debating tournaments, but they still maintain the same features, right? We point to Judaism. You had Orthodox Judaism for thousands of years, then you got Reform Judaism, now you have liberal Judaism. And again, it might be more palatable to us, but they maintain the same features, they're just as exclusive, and they limit choice for individuals, and oftentimes impoverish individuals, just as much. Secondly, do we need the institution to give expression to the religious inclinations of humanity? First of all, to say that it's innate concedes to a degree that it is not the institution that creates the need, the desire, the spirituality. It is something within us. And religion corrals that to make us give them money, oftentimes, but to bolster their own power. We think we should harness that innateness and let people express it. This side of the house then said, also, a good point to support that is the fact that churches and institutions do change, but our innate spirituality doesn't. So what should we preference? Our innate spirituality, and not let it be encumbered and limited and tainted by churches and synagogues and whatever else people prefer to pray in. This side of the house then said you need the structure to give people clarity. Oftentimes you don't. I think that many people tell you you need the structure so they can tell you what to think about what you're reading. We think people can, under our model, come to their own conclusions, even if they are, to us, intellectually inferior or intellectually insufficient. We think people should be able to come to their own conclusions. But also, it ignored Tim's setup that said people are more than welcome to come together and discuss, to come together and air their opinions and get advice from one another. But there's not allowed to be a hierarchy, there's not allowed to be an accepted doctrine, and there's not allowed to be a policy whereby you are pushed out of that group if you disagree on something. I would point to biblical studies courses in most secular universities is a good example of what we support. This side of the house then said you need it for community and togetherness. We'd say again that community and togetherness comes at the expense of people who are pushed out or stay out of that community. No thank you. But also oftentimes they pull apart these communities. I'll get back to that in just one moment. But also community togetherness and good feeling can exist outside of that. Like extended families are oftentimes extremely close and do so regardless of religious affiliation or lack thereof. But also we point to really important big community groups and communities in large cities that are increasingly atheist or agnostic, and to say that you are not a community because you do not have the religious ties that bind is hugely insulting to those communities. Community and togetherness can exist outside of institutionalised religion. No thank you. Turning to the question of choice. This side of the house said plenty of religions let you determine what to think yourself. Like Anglicans let you pray to God yourself. Oh, so generous. Thanks, Anglicans. You also tell me I can't be a lesbian, right? That's the problem. I grew up in the Sydney Anglican Church and they're pretty goddamn dogmatic. It's not like Protestantism has escaped that particular pitfall. This side of the house then said you have a differential level of buy-in if you want. Oftentimes not. There is a high bar that you have to jump, or in the case of Catholicism, you're excluded, excommunicated officially, or in the case of often Hindu communities in India, you're de facto excommunicated insofar as they literally push you out of the village and do not allow you to return. Differential levels of buy-in are possible under our ideal world, but not in most majority of circumstances under theirs. I'll take closing anytime you guys want to pop up. Yeah.
How happy do you think most believers would be with the idea that they're worshipping and praying to their own subjective construct of God?
That's exactly the point, because institutional institutionalised religion inculcates a feeling in people that they have to go to the nth degree to defend a subjective conception of God. That reaction from believers is the very problem that I'll go on to in my substantive, which talks about governments being hamstrung by crazies, basically. So, very briefly in rebuttal, does this create tension? This side of the House only rebutted it by rebutting an example. They said, Ireland, that's about nationalism. Even if we accept it's only about nationalism, religion gave voice, gave power, gave institutional cred, and gave a sense of togetherness and otherness to that conflict more than nationalism probably would have. But also, if we want to get into the nitty-gritty of the example, when the Old English came to Ireland when they were all still Catholic, they integrated rather easily. It was just when Protestantism was added to the mix that things got really hairy and bombs started to go off. But also, I want to point to Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, places in the southern United States, Hindus burning Christians in parts of India, to say that we're not just relying on Ireland, to say that religion creates tension, it creates violence, and it creates ill feeling. So, what is the impact on government and policy? Democratic governments tiptoe around organised religion all the time, and they temper and alter policy to help that individual interest group, like AIPAC in the United States. A president of the United States can't lift a finger on Israel without consulting this group of people. The proliferation of religious lobby groups around the world, and increasingly in the developing world, like Hindus in India, which have created laws in the Indian parliament to restrict the times and the ways that other religions can worship. Creation of the new parliament in Afghanistan because of religious factions all came together and created hugely discriminatory policies against women because of religious lobby groups that were in Afghanistan at the time. Why is this bad and distinct from any other interest group voicing their opinions in Parliament? Because they're mostly undemocratic and you don't have a guarantee that it is the will of the adherents that is being represented at the top. That's increasingly the case with the Southern Baptist Church, where the adherents are increasingly pro-homosexual rights, but the lobby groups at the top aren't and continue to create regressive government policy. They create regressive government policy because they're more fanatic and more powerful. All churches, all synagogues, all religions are hierarchical, dogmatic, and exclusive and make people miserable. We propose.
I now call upon the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Doug Cochran.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I cannot express how proud I am to be speaking on this side of the motion. I want to talk firstly about the exclusive nature of religion. That was the main problem. It's all hierarchical, as proposition said. Then I want to talk about its propensity for conflict, and thirdly a wee bit about rules and dogma. Firstly, under this first point, let's deal with the prop we got, which was essentially replacing religion with enthusiastic Bible study. I've got a couple of interesting points here. Number one, they said you can't exclude, it's just Bible studies which you can't exclude anyone. So if I'm reading the text and I'm like, I've got this really, really diverse interpretation from you, it would seem to be more beneficial if I gathered with people who had roughly congruent beliefs so we could decide on the nuances of our opinion, rather than being like, no, the Apocrypha is kosher, no, the Apocrypha is not kosher, no, kosher is not kosher, etc. It seems like their model would devolve to us. Secondly, like this is a big point, like they keep saying it's all hierarchical. All organizations are hierarchical. It strikes me, even the community groups in the inner cities, which Bronwyn is so keen on, probably exhibit some elements of hierarchy. It seems reasonable that people who are really good at interpreting texts would somehow rise to the top on an unofficial basis. They just wouldn't have any fancy hats to wear. And then, like, thirdly, this is a big point for me. So you're reading the text, all the texts they like, and you're reading in the Gospels. Who do you think I am? Jesus Christ asks. Peter answers, I tell you that you are Christ, the Son of God. Christ says, I tell you that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. What happens if, like a billion people around the world today, your interpretation of that text means you think there really ought to be a pope descending from the bishopric of Rome? So, like, some interpretations will themselves be more conducive to leadership. Moreover, what happens when you read the Gospels and hear admonitions to the appointment of deacons and St. Paul's letters? What happens when you read the Torah and get certain other admonitions of leadership and priesthood caste? So you're really going to have some pretty aggressive reinterpretations in their incredibly amazing Bible studies. Moreover, they said leadership's not very good because it's very exclusive. Okay, sometimes religion is exclusive. We suggest that its tendency, though, is to be as inclusive as possible. The most successful religions will gun for the most amount of converts. So exclusive religions will, generally speaking, be less and less successful. Moreover, what we say is religion is less of a tendency to hierarchy than other ways of thinking and other groups. Why? There's always someone at the top who's not human. You can't simply exalt yourself as a leader and say, I'm the best person in the world, because there's always a court of appeal that's divine. Even individuals who have to claim divine authority have to ground that somehow. They have to ground it in the text, and they have to get you to buy into that interpretation. No thank you. Secondly, propensity for conflict. Marie already dealt with this well when she says religion is part of a universal experience, as is conflict. So we shouldn't be surprised to see the two coinciding quite frequently. See Bronwyn's examples. Tim's rather dubious interpretation of Balkan conflicts that Serbs, Croats and Bosniaks were all speaking the same language, all in the same ethnic, but just decided because of religious differences that had existed for centuries, decided in the 1990s they'd finally had enough of different interpretations. I find it impossible. I suggest it was the eradication of religion under Tito in the 70s, which meant that the way in which people aligned to themselves and thought of themselves was far more based on their ethnic clusters in the Balkans than the religions which might have acted on and bridle upon their worst impulses, might have made them feel the weight of eternity upon them, even with their smallest decisions. What happens when we have seen those few times when religion has been expunged from the human consciousness? We get Maoism, we get Stalinism, we get individuals who don't believe that there is any eternal account they will have to give for their actions, who think of themselves as the sole voice of reason. We say religion instills within you at least some amount of humility about yourself and your capacities, which they aren't able to give. I'll talk about why their Bible study doesn't come later on. Moreover, what we say is that these sort of groups will always have an incentive to evangelize as much as possible. They said the Mormons will treat you like, I don't think Mormons all live in, walled compounds. I mean, there's not enough concrete to build a wall around Utah. But like, the fact that you're going to hell is exactly what drives the altruism to convert you, to sell your religion to these people. Like, they say you force people to give all of their income or loads of income to their Catholic Church. We say that's the sort of charity that they want to inspire, which you can more easily inspire when you tell people there are eternal rewards that will more than compensate for their temporary loss of income. We think those temporal incentives that impact more strongly on their side. I'll take a point from closing.
You say nobody tells you what to think in organised religion. What about children brought up in organised religion who have no choice to buy into this self-reinforcing idea?
Okay, the wrong assumption on proposition is that the default state of humanity ought to be total atheism or agnosticism. We don't understand why your tradition, or at least some sort of religious or some sort of irreligious tradition, or just sort of participation in the children's version of Bible study, which is presumably an add-on to the building. Like, Mr. Speaker, what we say on this side of the House is children might not have a choice when they participate in certain religious practices. I don't know if they'll have a choice about attending Bible study. It's presumably they're going to be brought up in some sort of tradition, be that nationalism, etc., be that whatever sort of communal organisation that defaults from it. Finally, about rules. Maria's dealt with this to some extent. We think if you don't like the rules, you can form your own ones. They kept saying, aha, aha, aha. But it doesn't matter that like every church in every town, small town in Missouri has 8 different independent fundamentalist Baptist churches, because they all have the same problems. The problem is hierarchy, and I already explained why that's oftentimes, in some form or another, an innate form of human society. So it's not mutually exclusive. But moreover, what we say is, it isn't enough for most people to think that they've just personally accessed a bit of religion, that things have changed between decades, between generations, and that they're just sort of figuring it out for themselves. Some people crave that tradition. Some people crave being a part of a wider project. They can't provide that, because they're saying, it's up to you. There's an existential crisis that you've got to solve yourself. Some people in those circumstances find it easiest to participate in ceremonies, etc. Ceremonies like communion, which are very difficult to effect depending on your interpretations, without the use of leadership. We say it's that participation in a long chain of events, a huge community of believers which spans a community and often an entire world, which gives people the solace they crave. They beg the question at every point when they say individuals need to have this community, but they have to discover it for themselves. They have to be constantly fractaling away from groups and forming new ones. If they want to, we leave them that out clause. But if they wish to stay within a religious community which helps build their faith and inculcate it through tradition, through ceremony, through participation in a long chain of events, we provide that as well. We've shown you that whilst religions may have bad elements, whilst they may be exclusive, while they may inculcate rules that are bad, we always provide for some sort of bridle on their affections by the morality they inculcate. The fact that they always tell you there is a king higher than Caesar. If they suggest that conflict is bad, we suggest it is religion that they need, and that is why we beg to oppose.
I now call upon the Member of Government, Pat Coldwell, to introduce the case.
Mr. Speaker, there are people who believe that Elvis Presley is still alive. But if they mention that in conversation, job interviews, they pay an instant social price in the form of ill-conceived laughter. Why does that price not obtain when they claim to believe in a higher power? It's because there's a special legitimacy that attaches to that belief, born of that institution. The second thing is that legitimacy is self-perpetuating, that the institutions make sure that people can't escape those rules to which they have been forced into by birth. At closing government today, I'm going to tell you two things. First is why people cannot meaningfully choose to adopt the rules that put them inside a religious community, and second of all, why they can never leave to get out from those oppressive rules. The second is the pernicious influence of religion and organised religion specifically on the broader community, why it makes a habit of denying rights to those people who shouldn't be denied rights. First question on community. Rebuttal, by the way, will be intertwined. Question of getting into the community. Kind of the contention from opening opposition was almost as if there was this world where people had this innate sense that they wanted to worship for God, and then kind of chose from a range of competing religious institutions as to which one best suited those beliefs. What utter crap. People are put into a religion from the moment they are born. One of the ways we know that is because religions like Judaism and like Catholicism have explicit rules that you must raise and baptize your children in that religion. You cannot marry a non-Catholic if you're Catholic, and if you do, they must convert or agree to raise your children within that church. We don't think that that is appropriate to say that, oh, all of a sudden people have meaningfully chosen from the range of different things. We think the quality of that choice is compromised. They're not finding or actualising their own spirituality. Instead, they're buying into a set of rules about which they have never had a say. The second kind of idea was, well, if they don't like the rules, they can just get out. Untrue. Two reasons. One, there is awfully strong social pressure to remain within that community. It often forms the basis for the structure of that community. It's really, really hard for young girls in northern suburbs of Paris who are forced to wear a burqa to say to their parents, look, I'm out, I don't want to do this anymore, and just don't believe this is necessarily a good idea, because everyone within their church and their parents tells them that is exactly what they should be doing. That's the extreme example, but try being a young Jewish or Catholic kid and saying to your parents at the age of 12 or 13 or 17 or 18, as you come to grips with issues of sexuality that mean you might not fit within that church, that all of a sudden this is not for you. So that brings us to the second problem. If you leave, you are explicitly, by these organised religions, damned. You are going to hell. You have no access to that afterlife that is the carrot of these religions. Those kinds of rules perpetuate that obedience. The two things we heard kind of in support of this was, one, why shouldn't people just hang out with people who interpret books in the same way? Why the hell should they? What valid university course would offer only one interpretation of a text and put everyone in the same room and never allow for a divergence of ideas? That divergence only comes when you escape institutional rules that say things must be interpreted in this way, and moreover, if you don't interpret it in this way, you're damned for eternity. The last thing that we heard was that some texts are just conducive to hierarchy. We would just question the self-interest of the first person who picked up that particular verse and say, this one makes me the boss. Yeah. I'm a kid. Everyone pretty much has to do what I say. We just don't think that that's valid. But But second of all, and this was the best argument, right? There's a court of appeal, right? I think the technical legal problem with that court of appeal is that we don't have standing, right? You know, in the afterlife, you can't file a suit when you disagree with a diktat from a pope who, by the way, still claims infallibility on all of those decisions, like, for instance, the sexuality. And if you're going to tell me Vatican II, that was like a generous move in 48 from like things in Latin to things in English, and did none of the things that you claim that it did. On to this second question of the debate, and I'll take closing in 1 second. Why does it affect the broader community, and why does that affect Vinicius? Closing.
Why are you any more free if your parents teach you religion based on a genuinely homophobic Bible than if you're brought up in an organised religion?
I think it would be horrible for parents to teach their children that gay people are worth less than any other individual. I think that teaching is more likely when those parents belong to a church that says gay people are worth less than any other individual. The numbers are invidious. It turns out that if you do surveys of atheists, they're reasonably okay with women's rights, they're reasonably okay with things like gay marriage. It turns out when you add up the 1.5 billion members of the Catholic Church in 400 million population countries like Indonesia and question on their faith, they buy into diktats that say certain people, because certain choices that they've made, are automatically going to hell. We think that if this is about that kind of teaching, it's less likely to happen. And by the way, the justification for parents who would have to teach there's just this value that gay people are worth less would have to be founded on something other than it's just the rules. It's just how the church rolls, people. It would have to be founding on a more thing that promotes that kind of discussion that Doug wanted to deny people. What's that effect on the broader social fabric? Claims of religion explicitly trespass on claims of science and good policy making. So we know that there is a social utility in allowing people the right to marry despite their sexuality. We also know that occasionally religion gets it wrong. But he's able to claim this belief that oh, well, it's a matter of faith, so we can just do that. And government kowtows because of the exactly hierarchical nature of religions. So in schools in the United States, where school boards are forced to teach intelligent design alongside evolution, they're forced to do so because people say, look, it might not be scientifically valid, but lots of people in this church think it's a cool idea. And that bankrupts the education of all of those children. These aren't subjective questions, they're objective ones. The debate is compromised by the power of religion. Why is that? It's because the religion is non-representative, right? Just like teachers' unions, who, to hark back to previous motions, are full of bastards. The people who are at the head of these churches do not represent a unanimous opinion. So whilst there might be divergence within the Catholic Church about the status of gay people, there is no divergence at the top, because the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith enforces one message. And most importantly, those most conservative members are those people who have the power to pick up a phone and tell a president or a congressperson exactly what they should be teaching. How does that affect people outside the community? It means that if you're a gay person who wants access to marriage, you are told, not just by religious institutions, but by the state, who listens to their leaders, that you are worth less than other people in that community. It legitimises a message that some people may buy into, but other people might not. In those countries where there's even less of a divide between the state and the church, like places in sub-Saharan Africa, that message is even more pernicious. It's, you can't use condoms because they actually increase the risk of AIDS. These are objective questions, and it's important they have policy discussions that doesn't trample on the rights of individuals. Where the church takes over and by its social and political hierarchy is allowed to legitimate those views of prejudice to deny people rights, not just within but without that community, we think it is time for organised religion to be demonstrated to have failed. We proudly propose.
I call upon Hugh Burns to introduce the case for Oxford A.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Ben and I are going to bring you 2 points of extension. Number one, we're going to talk about the values instantiated by religion. We're going to take a look at the idea of organisation in particular, something the last speaker wasn't very willing to talk about. Then secondly, we're going to take a look at meaningful experiences. We're going to suggest that the framework of an organised religion can provide more meaningful religious experiences for millions of people around the world. That's why billions of people opt into this framework under the status quo. Before that, some brief rebuttal. A lot of the rest will be integrated. Thing number one, he talks a lot about choice, how you don't have a choice to get into religions. What's important to point out here is, first prop say, in their world, they still want people to be religious, right? They still want people to read the Bible, they still presumably are going to be raising their kids in these religions. No analysis whatsoever as to why having a situation where you're in particular betraying your family and the stance they took against the world is like making you more free than a situation where you're betraying a large faceless organisation. So they've missed the relevant comparison. More generally, ladies and gentlemen, it's unclear why any choice any of these sorts of choices are free, right? Just growing up, just having experiences, that inculcates values in you. They haven't told us why the sorts of values inculcated by religion are more important to be things that you can choose than other values that you get. The next thing he tells you is, well, religion can lead to sort of bad views, things like evolution being taught in classrooms. No, thank you. Number one, it's unclear why these views are intrinsically bad. First prop told you that there exists inside people a fundamental understanding of the existence of God. They use that as the premise for this debate. Given that, and given that the way in which we presume we have access to these sorts of understanding is epistemically different from the way in which we have access to, say, scientific understanding, why isn't it okay to say that, like, religious knowledge is a valid form of knowledge, and perhaps if people care about it, it should be taught in schools? No, thank you. Moreover, like, why is that less likely now? No, thank you. They tell you, well, there's no divergence at the top of a religion, but there might be divergence at the bottom. Typically, politicians tend to respond to the fact that there's divergence at the bottom. That's why, no, thank you, civil unions have been introduced in Ireland, despite the fact that 90% of the population is theoretically Catholic. Now, substantial. Including me. Now, substantial. A couple of things. Number one, why values are instantiated better. Because we hear a lot on proposition about how it's really bad when churches instantiate the idea that gay people are abominations. The important point to raise here is that they haven't told us at all why private contemplation and reading the Bible, where in Leviticus it tells you that to sleep with a person of the same gender is an abomination, is any less likely to lead to that sort of homophobia. We would suggest that that's a very important burden that they've missed. No. So why are organisations, on the whole, in terms of the comparative, perhaps more likely to reach better answers? A few reasons. Number one, because where there exists an organisation, there exists a venue for dialectic and argument, for different people to like have discussions about what the right truth is. Why? Because unlike in their world, people are working towards an objective truth about what God wants. So that means you can tell people that their conception of what religion is wrong. That goes away completely when it's just a subjective experience. I can take homophobes right now and tell them that what they say is overridden by the later message of Jesus in the New Testament when he talks about loving everyone regardless of their sins. I can't do that in their world where it's just a subjective experience, where their understanding of the Bible is as valid as any other. The existence of a framework for religion provides that sort of situation, and that's really awesome. The next thing we tell you is that, again, on the whole, in terms of the comparative, the existence of more people within a religion and the desire of an organised religion to gain more converts creates an incentive for that religion to be more inclusive. No, thank you, because it wants to win people over. That's why, for example, the Catholic Church can't be racist, because it wants everyone to be a Catholic. No, thank you. Again, that disappears when it's only you and your little commune reading the Bible together. No, thank you. Lastly, we tell you, and this is important, in terms of conflict, I never started my timer because someone threw me one. In terms of conflict, God is on my side, guys.
Have 1 minute.
Okay, maybe not then. In terms of conflict is more likely on religious grounds when politicians can use religious arguments without any hierarchical church there to tell them they're wrong. No, thank you. What we find in situations like Northern Ireland is that it wasn't the Pope telling Catholics that they should go out and bomb pubs. In fact, Catholic priests would refuse communion. No, thank you. To IRA murderers. With good reason. No, thank you. That doesn't happen in their world. No, thanks. Yeah. Well, yeah.
I told you in my speech that unelected religious leaders don't represent the views of their laity. Oftentimes, because of their institutional power, they're the ones forcing policy on government and everybody else, like abortion policy in the United States. Are you okay with that?
Okay, they force policy on people insofar as, in as much as those people agree with those policies, right? In situations like Ireland where most Catholics don't agree with the Catholic doctrine on homosexuality, that doctrine is not instantiated in law. But moreover, it's unclear why these religious policies, as valid as you may think they are illegitimate policies for governments to instantiate. If people want to buy into those rules, that's fine, and that's what I'm going to talk about now, meaningful experiences of religion. Thing number one, rules. Because in fact, unbounded choice may not be a very nice way to live your life. Choice bears on people, ladies and gentlemen, and not knowing what sort of mental framework in which to make decisions can be an incredibly harrowing way to live your life. no thanks. What we tell you is that religion offers people an opportunity to opt into a situation, or to be raised in a situation, where they have a framework of rules with which to make choices, to make those choices easier, so they can come to moral understandings and feel like, in some sense at least, they are living a good life, that they're not just out there in the ether in a subjective world. No thank you. That makes people feel really a whole lot better about the sorts of choices they make. Number two, in terms of hierarchy and organisation, what we tell you is, like, for most people, belief in God isn't some sort of subjective fact that, like, they've intuited but is no more or less true than any other. It's an objective thing that they think is true about the world. When you have an organised religion with a billion other Catholics believing the same thing, that makes it a lot easier for you to believe that what you have found is an objective truth about the world that has been verified by other people's experience. We tell you that this is particularly important when you come in hard times, when you've experienced trauma, perhaps when a relative has died, ladies and gentlemen. You don't want to spend a load of time reading Kant to try and figure out what sort of moral framework you should approach the situation in. You want something out there that you can reach out to. That's really important. I love reading Kant too, guys, don't worry. But thirdly, we talk about ceremony. A big part of religious belief is ceremony. Maybe you just think that, like, it's nice to glorify God with loads and loads of other people in the most extravagant way that you can do it. Again, this organised religion gives you the opportunity to do that because organisation makes, like, stuff more efficient. We tell you also, like that's what the model is, not having churches. We tell you also, like, living in a community, feeling like other people identify with you, having that sort of signifier. Again, that's an incredibly meaningful part of the religious experience, and we're going to help. Lastly, ladies and gentlemen, religious organisations provide support networks. They provide people you can talk to, even if you are at odds with your immediate family, even if you're down on your luck, even if you have these sort of situations. Support networks driven by altruism, driven by belief in God. Ladies and gentlemen, these are amazing. So, ladies and gentlemen, for loads and loads and loads of reasons, I'm really proud of you guys.
I call upon the Government Whip, Mr. Paul Carr.
Well, from closing just then, we heard that organised religion is an easy choice, and that is a good thing. From opening, we heard that organised religion is a self-reinforcing choice, and that is a good thing. On closing government, we are happy to be the team today that forces people to think a little bit harder about whether God is out there for themselves, if that results in more satisfactory results. If that results in people's ultimate religious and spiritual affiliation being a better representation of what they actually choose to do, rather than what they are forced into when they are children. When that more satisfactory result results in policy that doesn't bind other people with worse public outcomes. Let's look at three issues in rebuttal. Firstly, the opposition extension. Secondly, to revisit our extension. And thirdly, some social impacts of religion from the opening half. So firstly, to the opposition extension. And we heard that, religion is good because it gives you a ready-made preset of values, and that, you know, private contemplation can lead you to conclusions that are just as evil as that of organised religion. Pat answered a point of information by saying that religion makes all those things so much more likely, and that is the harm that accrues to organised religion. Opening opposition conceded that when they told us that the great thing about organised religion was that in an increasingly atheist world, organised religion self-reinforces people's belief. The reason it does this is that people never hear a conflicting view, never turn their mind to the idea that maybe gay is not a sin. And lastly, what we told you was in a point of information that papal infallibility draws a link between thinking that value and going to hell, which in effect forces people to buy into that to an extent that private contemplation of evil homophobic views simply wouldn't do. Then we heard from closing, but Jesus contradicts all that evil. That is empirically not true. Almost all organised religions are homophobic. But second of all, we would argue that people should argue against racism and homophobia, because racism and homophobia are wrong, not because some guy in a religious text says so. If you base your opposition to racism and homophobia based on what someone in a religious text says, and not the rational reason that people are created equal, then we think that that is a very fragile consensus against those evil ideas, and that is not acceptable. Second thing about op extension, about people's meaningful experiences. And this was my favourite. Choice is really hard. Let's make it easier for people. Look, that was our extension. That choice is hard, and that encourages people to outcomes that hurt other people, like teaching people children intelligent design when that is when that is unscientific inherently. Secondly, they told us, oh, you're going to fall on hard times, and you're going to want the easy explanation for what's happened to you. Well, first of all, when people fall on hard times and someone dies in their family, that's often the time that they question religion most, because it's seemingly abandoned them. But secondly, we think we would prefer that people read Kant or Epicurean philosophy for comfort, because that is not falsifiable in the same way. But we think that is based on reasoning, rather than just being told that you have to buy into something holus bolus, which is a very fragile belief indeed. Second thing I want to look at is our own extension. And what we told you is that getting into these organised religions is not a reflection of the fact that you want to belong to part of something. It's not a reflection of the fact that you're comforted by the fact that you have a leader. What it is a reflection of is that you happen to be born into a family that believes that thing, that the overwhelming majority of people grow up in the religion that their parents had. When we asked that in a point of information to opening, they said, but you have to be brought up in some tradition. It might be a nationalist tradition, for example. But that very team themselves conceded that nationalism was like a cause of war and violence. We would say that any of those irrational beliefs, any of those authorities, which you cannot contradict with reason, result in those harms. The second thing we brought you in extension is just why it is so difficult to get out of religious communities, the sorts of pressures that people face when they're threatened with ostracism from all their friends and family, when they're told that they are going to hell if they disagree with religious doctrine. And for this reason, we don't think it's a choice either. Last thing we brought you in extension, and I'll take opening in a minute, was that religion has a pernicious policy effect, and what we brought you was that the pernicious effect is that religious claims, like there is a God, are not falsifiable. They are not scientific, and they therefore are not rational and a basis from which we can base policy. How can you teach children intelligent design in a science classroom when intelligent design is just like a catch-all theory to explain the absence of reason, to resort to a supernatural explanation? We say you cannot harm people's education by allowing that to dictate policy. Yes?
If religion is irrational and unfalsifiable, and people shouldn't base their beliefs on religious texts, how does that reconcile with your opening government? I believe in God, and that's fine.
Look, opening government said, find your own path. All right? They didn't prejudge that it was going to be a religious path. And if we return to your logic at opening, where you said that the great thing about Protestantism is it doesn't have priests, the great thing about religion is that it's splintered into lots of itty bits so that you can choose, we would say that choice is maximised when everyone is making a personal choice, but rather than one that is being made for them by their parents or someone who's claiming to have a direct line to God. So in fact, all the good characteristics you could find of organised religion were its tendencies towards not being organised religion, but in fact people's own private beliefs, which we're happy to have people continue to have. Last thing I want to visit in rebuttal is like some social effects. And we heard war is fundamental in the human experience. It had nothing to do with religion. What a crock. Maybe war wouldn't be fundamental to the human experience if religion weren't one of the major causes for it. And then the argument was, but religious leaders call for peace. Well, sometimes, but any sane religious or non-religious person calls for peace because they don't want people to die, which is a much more reasonable reason to be calling for peace than because someone in a pointy hat says it because of what they think based on an antiquated text. We think that religion is a way of demonizing other people, saying, I am a Christian, he is a Muslim, they are wrong, so war is justified. Whereas on the other hand, although Mao may have been atheist, he didn't go to war or kill people because he was atheist, and that is a key difference. Lastly, charity. The drive of hell is a good thing for charity. We think people should give charity because other people are human, not on the basis of religious texts. Ladies and gentlemen, when you base policy on more rational ideas, when what you believe is actually a reflection of choice and not was forced upon you, the world is a better place. We beg to propose.
I finally call upon the opposition whip, Ben Walder.
Ladies and gentlemen, the average human existence is inevitably going to have moments of despair, moments of trial and moments of intense loneliness, where the insane subjective framework of the open field of choice that government want to leave you with is just unlikely to be as good for people as having a tight-knit community that can give you meaningful values. 2 points of summary. Firstly, meaningful religious experience and organisation, or if you prefer, God. Secondly, value instantiation and social consequences, or if you prefer, war. So, God. Opening government tell you that somehow organised religion disrupts your connection with God. What we tell you from closing off is that this completely misses what it means to be a believer. Christians and Muslims do not want to believe that they believe in their own subjective construct of what God is. They want to believe that they have found something which is genuinely out there, which exists objectively. And what we bring you from closing is that what organised religion allows you to do is verify more strongly that those things are true, to get exactly the meaningful experience that you are looking for. That is why religious hierarchy may be good at the point at which a teacher can tell you that something is true. That is why dogma may be good at the point at which you can verify in common with the experience of 1 billion other Catholics around the world that you have found something which is meaningfully out there, and that is what you share, and that is what you believe in. We get no response at all to that at closing government. We think that's incredibly damaging to their case. No thanks. But what else do we bring you from closing government? Because what we tell you is that the fact of organised religion allows you to make those experiences more meaningful. We tell you that sometimes unbounded choice probably isn't good for people. That the fact of going to church every Sunday and of taking communion gives you rituals to structure your life around that gives you some security when you are making all the other incredibly uncertain choices in your world. What do we hear from closing gov? Firstly, we hear, well, the headlines of our extensions were the same, so, like, clearly ours must win. We say that's not actually a response to the argument we were giving you. Secondly, they tell you, we would rather have people read Kant. We think there are a couple of problems with this argument. First of all, it's bloody difficult. For the vast majority of people all around the world, I just don't think the groundwork is going to provide the meaningful grounding for their everyday existence that they need. Secondly, what we tell you is that particularly for believers and the types of people that want religious belief, abstract moral philosophy doesn't have the kind of meaningful, objective grounding that they might seek, because it doesn't base itself on something which is supposed to be genuinely out there. No thanks, guys. What we also tell you is that ritual is particularly good. What we particularly add to this, closing on, is the value of being able to link the ceremonies you engage in with particular religious events and things which are supposed to have happened in the Bible. When Jews come together in synagogue on Pesach, that is to celebrate a particular religious event when they were passed over in Egypt that tells them they are God's chosen people. Allowing organised religion allows you to generate those meaningful links with the religious events in your history. No thanks, guys. We also tell you about the value of a cradle-to-grave support network, something that never abandons you, regardless of what happens in your life. Yeah, I'll take 10.
When Saul was on the road to Damascus, he was alone with God. When the author of Amazing Grace found God, he was alone with God. And their experience was more meaningful because there was no dictator in a beretta to tell them that their spirituality was defective and wrong.
Sorry, Tim, I just don't believe that that applies to the 1.2 billion people that want to be Catholic. Not everyone can have a vision. Not everyone can have that individual meaningful moment of impact with God. No thanks. what we do get in response to this out of closing gov is all this stuff about choice. We have a few responses to this. Firstly, we think they're obsessed by choice in a way they give us no reason to particularly care about, at the point that we give you a whole load of reasons to believe that religious or like organised religion might just make your life better. Secondly, we tell you the fact that something like maybe developing and be able to reinforce itself doesn't necessarily mean that it's coercive, at the point at which that message maybe has appeal to lots of other people. Lastly, they tell you, well, they threaten you with hell. Couple of responses to this. Firstly, we think, in some sense, all moral frameworks threaten you with punishment and some kind of wrongness in order to get you to comply. Secondly, no reason to believe that that's illegitimate when opening government concede that they do think we can say in some meaningful sense, and people are entitled to say, that there might be God. Secondly, let's talk about social consequences and war. Because, no thanks. Tim tries to tell you that, like, there's all this hate fomented by religion. We say that misses the relevant comparative in this debate. The relevant comparative is with all the other awful groups which may well be out there that cause you to have particular identifications. Ethno-nationalist groups, and so on. Why, in fact, are religious leaders better than those kind of groups? Firstly, because they have some kind of belief in shared humanity. We suggest an enormous number of religions don't try to dehumanize other people. They are in some sense based on moral frameworks that apply to others. Secondly, we tell you, and we bring you this at closing and get no response to it, that organised religion gives moral leaders to stand up to politicians who are trying to pervert religion, which is easier when you're just reading a text and doing it in your own private Bible study group. We get no response to that. We also get this stuff, no thanks, out of closing gov about racism and homophobia. What we tell you is, again, this misses the relevant comparative. At the point at which your religious text is genuinely homophobic, which tells you that people should be stoned for lying with another man, then we think we don't understand why the impossibility of getting schisms and getting reform and getting more liberal sects of the church and some kind of dialogue, all the things we tell you about at closing up, don't reduce the likelihood of racism and homophobia for at least some people within that faith. Closing up tell you you should argue the racists and the homophobes out of it. We say the problem with that is for those people, when they are religious, what is right and wrong is what is in the religious text. You can't argue back to them with Kant, you have to argue back to them within a religious framework. Organised religion enables you to do that. Lastly, they tell you that religions enforce policy on people wrongly. Except as Hugh tells you, no reason to believe that it's actually wrong. No reason to believe that these decisions are prima facie illegitimate, and moreover, that in genuine democracies, religions just don't have the power to enforce their beliefs on a whole load of people, even when they don't share them. Ladies and gentlemen, because this makes the lives of believers more meaningful and conflict less likely, I'm very proud to oppose.
The announcement will be made in the pink building when vote deliberations are finished.